To punish his son, Millionaire demands he marry a humble farmer girl. But what his son did next left him speechless. Hello and welcome to 80s Love Stories, where I, your favorite narrator, Christopher, bring you an exciting love story straight from the unforgettable 1980s. Get ready for a journey full of nostalgia and incredible twists. Today's story is truly remarkable, with an ending that's sure to touch your heart and leave you amazed. So, stay with me until the very last moment. I hope this experience is unforgettable for you, and may God bless you and your family. Now, let's get started. The summer of 1985 started with the screech of Italian leather shoes against marble floors and the echo of angry voices bouncing off the walls of Preston Manor. Jimmy Preston stood in his father's study, hands shoved deep in the pockets of his acid-washed jeans, watching the veins pulse in William Preston's neck as the older man paced behind his mahogany desk. $400,000. James. $400,000 in damages because you couldn't keep your Ferrari on the road. William slammed that morning's copy of the New York Post onto his desk. The headline screamed, "Preston heir's wild ride destroys historic fountain." Jimmy ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, the kind that had taken him an hour and a half a can of Aquanet to achieve. "Dad, it wasn't—" "Don't!" William raised a finger. "Don't you dare say it wasn't your fault. The security cameras caught everything. You were racing that Thompson boy down Fifth Avenue at 3 in the morning. Do you have any idea what this does to our reputation? To the Preston development deal we're trying to close?" The massive study felt suffocating despite its size. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, Manhattan sparkled in the June heat, uncaring about the drama unfolding in the penthouse above. Jimmy's reflection in the window looked smaller than usual, his designer clothes and carefully cultivated image suddenly seeming childish under his father's withering glare. "This ends now," William continued, his voice dropping to that dangerous quiet tone Jimmy hadn't heard since his mother's funeral 5 years ago. "I've tried everything with you. The best schools, therapists, opportunities most people would kill for. And how do you repay me? By becoming the laughingstock of New York's business community." Jimmy felt his jaw tighten. "If I'm such an embarrassment, why not just cut me off? Isn't that what all the other disappointed millionaire fathers do?" William's laugh was cold enough to freeze hell. "Oh no, son, that would be too easy." He pulled out a folder from his desk drawer and slid it across the polished surface. "You're going to fix this mess, and I know exactly how." Jimmy picked up the folder with suspicion. Inside were photographs of an apple orchard, its trees laden with spring blossoms. Mixed among the pictures were newspaper clippings about falling agricultural prices and bank foreclosure notices. "Miller's Orchard," William explained, sitting down in his leather chair. 200 acres of prime real estate just outside Albany. "I've been trying to acquire it for months for our new development project, but the owner's daughter is stubborn." A photo slipped from the stack. Jimmy caught it before it hit the floor, and for a moment he forgot to breathe. The girl in the picture couldn't have been more than 21 or 22. She wore overalls and work boots, her honey-blonde hair tied back in a messy ponytail as she reached up to inspect an apple blossom. There was something in her expression, a quiet determination, a natural grace that no amount of finishing school could teach. "Sarah Miller," William said, watching his son's reaction carefully. 22, took over the orchard after her father's stroke last year. She's refusing to sell, even though the bank's breathing down her neck. This is where you come in." Jimmy tore his eyes away from the photograph. "What do you mean?" "It's simple. You have 6 months to convince Sarah Miller to marry you. If you succeed, I'll forget about the fountain incident, restore your trust fund, and make you VP of Preston Development's new Albany division." The words hit Jimmy like a bucket of ice water. "You want me to marry her? Are you insane? Think of it as a business arrangement. Once you're married, the orchard becomes part of Preston Holdings. We develop the land. Everyone profits." William stood, straightening his tie. "Of course, if you refuse, I'll cut you off completely. No more credit cards, no more Manhattan apartment, no more trust fund. You'll have to make it on your own, if you can." Jimmy stared at Sarah's photograph again. There was something about her eyes, a kindness that made his stomach twist with guilt at what his father was proposing. "And what happens to her?" "After the land is developed, William waved his hand dismissively. She'll be well compensated. Besides, from what I hear, she's drowning in debt. You'd be doing her a favor. Jimmy walked to the window, watching the city below. Everything he'd ever known was here, his friends, his life, his future. But as he looked at his reflection, all he saw was the spoiled rich kid who'd never had to work for anything. "Fine," he said finally, his voice tight. But I have conditions." William raised an eyebrow. "You're hardly in a position to make demands." "1 year," Jimmy turned to face his father. "Give me 1 year, and I'll do this my way. No interference from you, no pressure from the company. And if I succeed, I want the orchard to remain operational, even if we develop part of the land." A slight smile crossed William's face. 6 months. And you'll live there, work there, prove you can handle actual responsibility for once in your life. I'll give you a modest allowance, enough to survive, not enough to party. If you break any of these conditions or fail to win her hand, you're cut off, permanently. The weight of the decision pressed down on Jimmy's shoulders. He looked at Sarah's picture one more time, at the quiet strength in her expression, and made his choice. "Just deal." 3 days later, Jimmy's Porsche roared along the highway toward Albany, his designer luggage crammed into the tiny trunk. The Post's headline that morning had announced his sudden interest in agricultural ventures, his father's way of controlling the narrative. His friends had laughed when he told them he was leaving, assuming it was another one of his elaborate pranks. But as the city skyline faded in his rearview mirror, replaced by rolling hills and farmland, Jimmy felt something he hadn't experienced in years: uncertainty. The cassette player blasted Tears for Fears, "Everybody Wants to Rule the World," as he spotted the sign for Miller's Orchard. He turned onto the gravel drive, past rows of apple trees that stretched toward the horizon. The evening sun painted everything in gold, and for a moment it was almost beautiful enough to make him forget why he was here. Then he saw her. Sarah Miller stood on the porch of a weathered farmhouse, wearing the same overalls from the photograph, but somehow looking even more striking in person. She was wiping her hands on a cloth, watching his approach with a mixture of curiosity and wariness. As Jimmy stepped out of his car, his Italian loafers crunching on gravel, their eyes met. And in that moment, despite all his careful planning and practiced charm, despite the weight of his father's ultimatum, Jimmy Preston realized he was in serious trouble, because Sarah Miller didn't look at him like he was James Preston III, heir to the Preston fortune. She looked at him like he was just another city slicker, who didn't know the first thing about hard work or apple trees or real life. And the worst part was, she was right. Sarah Miller had seen her share of strange things at the orchard, but nothing quite compared to the sight of James Preston III trying to carry his Louis Vuitton luggage up the creaky stairs to the farmhand's quarters. His powder blue polo shirt was already sporting sweat stains, and his carefully styled hair had wilted in the June humidity. "You know," she called from the bottom of the stairs, "most people would make 2 trips. Jimmy paused, breathing heavily. "I've got it." He adjusted his grip on the matching cases, nearly losing his balance. "A quick question, though. Is there a service elevator I'm not seeing?" Sarah bit back a smile. "Right next to the swimming pool and tennis courts." "Really?" "No." The largest suitcase chose that moment to slip from Jimmy's grasp, tumbling down the stairs and bursting open at Sarah's feet. Designer clothes spilled across the worn wooden steps like exotic fish washing up on a humble shore. A hot pink mesh tank top landed on her work boot. "Let me guess." She picked up the garment with 2 fingers. "Essential farming attire." Jimmy's face flushed. "It's for layering." "Right." Sarah tossed it back to him. "Look, Mr. Preston." "Jimmy." "Mr. Preston," she continued firmly, "I appreciate that your father thinks buying into our orchard is a good investment opportunity, but we're not interested in selling, not now, not ever. This land has been in my family for 4 generations. Jimmy descended the stairs, abandoning his luggage battle. "I heard about your father." "I'm sorry." Something flickered in Sarah's eyes, pain quickly masked by determination. "Dad's getting better. The doctors say he might even be able to come home from the rehabilitation center soon." She straightened her shoulders. "Which is exactly why we need to make this season count. If you're serious about learning the business, be ready at 5 a.m. tomorrow. We're spraying the north section before the heat kicks in." 5. In the morning, Jimmy checked his Rolex. That's like 4 hours from now. Welcome to farm life, city boy. Sarah headed for the door, then paused. Oh, and you might want to rethink your footwear. Those Italian loafers won't last 10 minutes in the orchard. After she left, Jimmy sat on the stairs amid his scattered belongings. Through the window, he could see the sun setting behind the apple trees, painting the orchard in shades of gold and pink. In Manhattan, he'd be getting ready for another night out. Clubs, drinks, the endless parade of meaningless fun that had defined his life for so long. Instead, he was here, surrounded by apple trees and judgmental farm girls with eyes the color of summer storms. The next morning arrived far too early, announced by a rooster that Jimmy immediately added to his mental list of mortal enemies. He stumbled down to the main house in the pre-dawn darkness, wearing the only pair of jeans he owned, without designer rips, and a black concert t-shirt from the last police tour. Sarah was already in the kitchen, pouring coffee into a thermal mug. She wore faded jeans, work boots, and a flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled up. Her hair was braided back practically, but a few stubborn strands had already escaped around her face. "You're late," she said without looking up. "The sun isn't even awake yet," Jimmy protested, eyeing the coffee pot desperately. "Here." She handed him a mug. "You'll need it. We've got a lot of ground to cover today." The next few hours were a blur of instruction, correction, and mild humiliation. Jimmy learned more about apple trees than he'd ever wanted to know, mostly through doing everything wrong first. By noon, he was covered in dirt, his hands were blistered, and he'd developed a healthy respect for anyone who did this kind of work daily. "Not bad," Sarah admitted, as they took a break under one of the older trees. "You only sprayed yourself twice." "Your concern is touching," Jimmy winced as he flexed his hands. "Is it always this intense?" "This is nothing. Wait until harvest season." Sarah pulled an apple from her pocket and offered it to him. "Here, you've earned it." The fruit was small and slightly spotted, nothing like the perfect specimens he was used to seeing in Manhattan markets, but when he bit into it, the flavor exploded across his tongue, sweet and complex and real. "Wow," he said, surprised. "This is amazing." "That's a Macintosh from last season's harvest. The cold storage keeps them pretty well." Pride crept into Sarah's voice. Dad always said our apples taste better because they have to work harder to grow. The soil here isn't the richest, but it gives the fruit character." Jimmy looked at her then, really looked at her, and saw something beyond the practical farmer's daughter. There was passion in the way she talked about the orchard, a deep connection to the land that he'd never experienced with anything in his own life. "Why don't you modernize?" he asked. "Get more equipment, expand operations." Sarah's expression clouded. "We've tried, but the banks—" She trailed off, then stood abruptly. "Break's over. The irrigation system in Section 4 needs checking." That evening, desperate to escape the relentless physical labor, Jimmy drove into town. Albany wasn't Manhattan, but he found a small mall that was still open. The familiar fluorescent lighting and air conditioning were like a balm to his aching muscles. He was sitting at the food court, demolishing his second slice of pizza, when he overheard two older men talking at the next table. "Shame about Miller's place," one said, shaking his head. "First Robert's stroke, now this business with the water rights." "Always thought that was strange," his companion replied. "All those problems starting right after they found those old papers in the barn." Jimmy's slice stopped halfway to his mouth. Before he could hear more, the mall's speakers crackled to life, announcing closing time over the opening notes of "Wake Me Up Before You Go-Go." On the drive back to the orchard, his mind raced. What papers? What problems? He thought about Sarah's defiance, her determination to keep the land despite their obvious financial troubles. There was more to this story than his father had told him. The orchard was dark when he returned, but a light burned in the barn. Through the open door, he could see Sarah at an old desk, surrounded by papers and ledgers. She was chewing on the end of a pencil, her face tight with worry in the harsh light of a single bulb. Jimmy stayed in his car, watching. The original plan had been simple: charm the farmer's daughter, secure the land, get back to his real life. But as he sat there, listening to Boy George sing about karma on his car radio, he realized two things. First, Sarah Miller was nothing like the simple country girl he'd expected, and second, he was starting to care a lot more about those worried lines around her eyes than he was about his father's ultimatum. He switched off the engine and, in the sudden silence, made a decision. He was going to figure out what was really going on at Miller's orchard, even if it meant risking everything in the process. The third week of Jimmy's agricultural education began with a discovery. He was sorting through old equipment in the barn's loft, actually working instead of just pretending to work, when he found it, a metal box, rusted and dented, hidden behind a stack of mouldering almanacs from the 1960s. Inside, beneath a layer of dust and dead spiders, lay a stack of yellow documents. The first was a survey map dated 1943, with handwritten notes crowding the margins. Jimmy squinted at the faded ink, making out phrases like underground stream and northern aquifer. "Hey, Sarah," he called out, "you might want to see—" A crack of thunder swallowed his words. Through the barn's high windows, he saw dark clouds rolling in fast from the west. Sarah's voice carried from outside, sharp with urgency. "Jimmy, get down here. We need to get the equipment covered." He shoved the box under his jacket and scrambled down the ladder. By the time he reached the ground, the first heavy drops were falling. Sarah appeared in the doorway, her hair whipping in the wind. "The tarps are loose on the tractors," she said. "Come on." They raced across the muddy yard together. The summer storm hit like a hammer, drenching them in seconds. They fought with the heavy tarps, securing them over the expensive machinery as lightning split the sky. "Last one," Sarah shouted over the downpour. They were struggling with the largest tarp when a gust of wind caught it, threatening to tear it from their grasp. Without thinking, Jimmy stepped behind Sarah, reaching around her to grab the corner. For a moment, they were pressed together, his chest against her back, both breathing hard from the effort. Time seemed to stop. Jimmy became acutely aware of the warmth of her despite the cold rain, the scent of her hair, apples and sunshine, and something uniquely Sarah. He felt her breath catch. Then the moment broke. They secured the tarp in silence and ran back to the barn. Inside, they stood dripping on the wooden floor, the storm raging outside. Sarah's wet clothes clung to her figure, and she pushed her soaked hair back from her face. Jimmy tried not to stare, failed miserably. "You've got, He gestured vaguely at her face. "What?" "A smudge. Just—" He reached out, his thumb brushing her cheek. The touch was electric. Sarah went very still, her eyes meeting his. The barn door slammed in a gust of wind, making them both jump. Sarah stepped back quickly, creating distance. "I should get changed," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "The Starlight Drive-In called earlier. They're still showing Raiders of the Lost Ark tonight if the storm clears. I usually deliver our apple pies to their concession stand on Thursdays." "I could help," Jimmy offered, too quickly. "With the deliveries? I mean, if you want." Sarah studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Meet me at the house in an hour. Try to wear something that isn't designer label. It's just a drive-in." Exactly 1 hour later, Jimmy was helping load boxes of fresh-baked pies into Sarah's battered pickup truck. The storm had passed, leaving the evening air clean and cool. He'd found an old Rolling Stones t-shirt and his least expensive jeans, though Sarah still rolled her eyes at his Ray-Bans. The Starlight Drive-In was a slice of pure Americana on the outskirts of town. Cars filled the gravel lot, their radios tuned to the movie's frequency. The massive screen stood against the darkening sky like a drive-in movie screens Jimmy had only seen in movies, while the neon-lit concession stand did steady business. "Sarah." The elderly woman at the counter beamed. "And who's this?" "Mrs. Henderson, this is Jimmy. He's helping at the orchard this summer." "Oh, the city boy everyone's talking about." Mrs. Henderson's eyes twinkled. "Sarah, honey, you didn't tell me he was so handsome." "Mrs. Henderson?" Sarah's cheeks flushed. "Never mind me, dear. Put the pies in the warmer. They'll sell out before the opening credits. They always do." They were heading back to the truck when the preview reel started. Sarah hesitated. "We could stay," Jimmy suggested. "I mean, if you want to. For quality control purposes, make sure they're serving the pies properly. Sarah laughed, a real laugh, not her usual guarded chuckle. Quality control. Is that what they're calling it these days? But she let him pay for tickets, and soon they were parked in the back row, the truck's radio playing the movie's theme music. The metal box from the barn pressed against Jimmy's back, where he'd hidden it under the seat, reminding him of his mission. But then Sarah reached into a paper bag and pulled out one of her own pies and 2 forks. Might as well make sure the quality's up to standard, she said with a small smile. They shared the pie as Indiana Jones raced across the screen. Jimmy watched Sarah more than the movie, fascinated by how she mouthed along with the dialogue, completely unself-conscious in the flickering light. You must have seen this a few times, he teased. My dad used to bring me here every Thursday during delivery runs, she admitted. It was our thing. Even in winter, we'd bundle up in blankets and... She trailed off, the memory catching in her throat. How is he? Jimmy asked softly. Sarah poked at the remnants of the pie. Better some days. The therapists say he's making progress, but the medical bills... She shook her head. Sorry, you don't want to hear about this. I do, actually. Jimmy surprised himself by meaning it. Sarah turned to look at him, really look at him, like she was seeing past the expensive sunglasses and practiced charm for the first time. The movie's light played across her face, and Jimmy had to fight the urge to brush back that one strand of hair that always escaped her ponytail. Why are you really here, Jimmy? She asked quietly. And don't tell me it's because you suddenly developed an interest in apple farming. The truth burned in his throat, demanding to be spoken, but before he could respond, a familiar voice called out, Sarah. Sarah Miller. A man approached the truck, his face hidden in the darkness. Sarah stiffened. Tom Blackwood, she said, her voice tight. What are you doing here? Can't a man enjoy a movie? He stepped into the light from the screen, revealing a weathered face and expensive clothes that didn't quite fit the setting. Though I'm more interested in why you're here with Preston's boy. Planning to sell, after all. The orchard's not for sale, Tom. Not to Preston Development, not to your company, not to anyone. Everyone has a price, Sarah. Your father understood that before his unfortunate accident. Jimmy saw Sarah's hands clench into fists. Without thinking, he reached over and took one in his hand, feeling the tremors running through her. I believe the lady said no, he said, surprising himself with the steel in his voice. Blackwood's smile didn't reach his eyes. Interesting. Wait till your father hears about this, Preston. He turned to leave, then paused. Oh, and Sarah, you might want to check those water rights again. Never know when paperwork might go missing. They watched him disappear into the darkness. On screen, Indiana Jones was fighting Nazis, but the excitement of the movie had evaporated. Sarah, Jimmy started. What did he mean about, take me home? She cut him off, pulling her hand away. Please. They drove back in silence, the metal box under the seat feeling heavier by the minute. Jimmy gripped the steering wheel, his mind racing. There was more going on here than a simple land grab. The documents, Blackwood's threat, Sarah's father's accident. It all connected somehow. As they pulled up to the farmhouse, Sarah spoke finally. Thank you for what you said to Tom, but I need to know I can trust you, Jimmy. No games, no hidden agendas. The truth rose up again, urgent and suffocating, but looking at her in the moonlight, remembering how her hand had felt in his, Jimmy made his second major decision of the summer. He lied. No games, he said. I promise. Sarah nodded once and went inside. Jimmy sat in the truck for a long time afterward, watching the lights go out in the farmhouse windows, trying to ignore the way his chest ached and the metal box seemed to burn beneath the seat. He'd come here to execute a simple plan: charm, marry, acquire. But now, holding documents that might answer all of Sarah's problems or destroy whatever was growing between them, Jimmy realized he was in way over his head, and the scariest part, he wasn't sure he wanted to surface. The documents from the metal box lay spread across Jimmy's bed, illuminated by his flashlight in the late-night darkness. The more he read, the more his stomach twisted. The survey maps showed an extensive underground aquifer system beneath the orchard, one that could supply water to the entire region. In an area increasingly plagued by drought, It was worth millions. A knock at his door made him scramble to hide the papers. "Yeah?" "Jimmy," Sarah's voice. "Are you still awake?" He shoved the documents under his pillow. "Come in." She opened the door, silhouetted in the hallway light. She wore sweatpants and an oversized Journey t-shirt that had to be at least 10 years old. Her hair was loose around her shoulders. He'd never seen it down before. "I couldn't sleep," she said, hovering in the doorway. "I keep thinking about what Tom said, about my dad's accident." "Come here," Jimmy said softly, patting the edge of the bed. "Tell me." Sarah hesitated, then sat beside him, drawing her knees up to her chest. Last year, right before his stroke, Dad was acting strange. He kept talking about finding something important, something that would save the orchard. Then one day, he went to check the irrigation system in the north field and... She swallowed hard. "Oh, they found him unconscious by the pump house. The doctors said it was just stress and age, but..." "You think it wasn't an accident?" Jimmy finished. She nodded, staring at her hands. A week later, someone broke into the barn. Nothing valuable was taken, but Dad's office was ransacked. And ever since then, Tom Blackwood and your father's company have been pushing harder to buy the land. The documents crinkled under Jimmy's pillow. He felt sick. "I want to get out of here," he asked suddenly. "What? Come on." He stood, offering his hand. "I know exactly what you need." 20 minutes later, they were cruising down empty streets in Jimmy's Porsche, the warm summer air whipping through the open windows. Sarah had protested at first, but now she was leaning back in the leather seat, watching the stars through the sunroof. "Where are we going?" she asked, as they pulled into the darkened mall parking lot. "You'll see." Jimmy led her to a side door and pulled out a ring of keys. "How do you have keys to the mall?" He grinned. "Made friends with the security guard last week. Turns out we both collect vintage vinyl." The mall was eerie after hours, their footsteps echoing off closed storefronts. But Jimmy walked with purpose, heading straight for the arcade. He flipped on the lights, and suddenly the space was alive with blinking screens and electronic beeps. "Ta-da!" He spread his arms. "Private arcade session. Nothing cures insomnia like Miss Pac-Man." Sarah laughed despite herself. "You're insane. Maybe. But I bet I can beat your high score." "You wish, city boy." They spent the next hour jumping from game to game. Sarah turned out to be a natural at Gallagher, while Jimmy dominated at Donkey Kong. They were neck and neck at Asteroids, when Sarah suddenly said, "He used to bring me here too." "Your dad?" She nodded, eyes fixed on the screen. "After Mum died, I was so angry at everything. Dad would pick me up from school on bad days and bring me here. Said it was impossible to stay mad while playing arcade games." Her ship exploded on screen. "Game over" flashed in bold letters. "He sounds like a good man," Jimmy said softly. "The best." Sarah turned to him, her face close in the arcade's dim light. "You remind me of him sometimes. Not the fancy clothes or the car, but the way you look at things. Like everything could be an adventure." Jimmy's heart hammered against his ribs. She was so close, looking at him with those storm cloud eyes, and all he had to do was lean forward. The mall's emergency lights flickered on, a warning that the security system would reactivate soon. "Sonic, we should go," Sarah said, stepping back. But she took his hand as they ran through the dark mall, both laughing like teenagers breaking curfew. In the parking lot, they caught their breath against the car's hood. The summer night wrapped around them like a blanket, crickets chirping in the distance. "Thank you," Sarah said. "I needed this. Any time." Jimmy looked at her, memorizing how she looked in this moment. Wind-blown hair, arcade lights reflecting in her eyes, that soft smile he was starting to live for. The drive home was peaceful, Sarah half dozing in the passenger seat as the radio played time after time, softly in the background. But as they pulled up to the farmhouse, Jimmy's phone lit up with a message. It was from his father. "Meeting tomorrow, Albany Grand Hotel, 9 a.m. Don't disappoint me." Reality crashed back like a bucket of cold water, the documents under his pillow, the aquifer, his father's ultimatum, Sarah's trust. "Jimmy?" Sarah touched his arm. "You okay?" He forced a smile. "Yeah, just tired. Get some sleep, farm girl." She squeezed his arm and slipped out of the car. He watched her go, the weight of his lies settling around his shoulders like a lead blanket. The next morning, Jimmy sat in the Albany Grand's lobby, the folder of documents heavy in his hands. His father's message had been clear: bring everything he'd found. William Preston strode in at exactly 9 a.m., immaculate in a three-piece suit that cost more than most cars. "Well," he demanded without preamble. Jimmy stood. "There's something you need to know." "Mr. Preston?" a new voice interrupted. They turned to see Tom Blackwood approaching, his smile sharp as a knife. "I hope I'm not late." "Right on time," William said. "Tom's been keeping me updated on your progress." Jimmy looked between them, understanding dawning like ice in his veins. "You're working together." "Of course we are," his father scoffed. "How do you think we knew about the aquifer in the first place? Tom's company has been trying to acquire that land for years. When they couldn't manage it, they came to us." "Sarah's father's accident," Jimmy said slowly. "That was you." "A regrettable necessity," Blackwood shrugged. He found the original surveys, started asking questions. The stroke was convenient timing. "Do you have the documents?" William held out his hand. Jimmy gripped the folder tighter, thinking of Sarah in the arcade light, trusting him, smiling at him, sharing pieces of her heart. "No," he said. "I know? No deal. Find another way to get your water rights. I'm out." William's face hardened. "Need I remind you of our agreement? Your trust fund, your future. Keep it." Jimmy turned to leave, then stopped. "Oh, and Dad? If anything happens to Sarah or her father, any accidents, any mysterious problems, I'll take everything I've found to the EPA. I'm sure they'd be very interested in what you're planning for that aquifer." He walked out of the hotel into the bright summer morning, his hands shaking but his heart lighter than it had been in weeks. His phone rang, Sarah's ringtone. The display showed a text. "Where are you? These apple trees won't prune themselves, city boy." Jimmy smiled, already heading for his car. He had no money, no inheritance, and no idea how to fix any of this. But for the first time in his life, he knew exactly where he belonged. When Jimmy pulled up to the orchard, Sarah was waiting by the old tractor, a concerned look on her face. "Where were you? And why are you wearing a suit?" He looked down at his business attire. He'd dressed up for the meeting with his father without thinking. "Would you believe I was interviewing for a position as the world's most overdressed farmhand?" She didn't smile. "Jimmy had to take care of something in town," he said quickly, loosening his tie. "Give me 5 minutes to change." But before he could escape, a sleek black Mercedes pulled into the driveway. Tom Blackwood stepped out, followed by 2 men in expensive suits. "Miss Miller," Blackwood called out, "we need to talk." Jimmy felt his chest tighten. "Sarah, get inside." "Why?" She looked between him and Blackwood, confusion turning to suspicion. "What's going on?" "Your young friend here has been keeping secrets," Blackwood said smoothly. "Why don't you ask him who he really works for?" The world seemed to stop. Jimmy watched the realization dawn in Sarah's eyes, saw the trust drain away like water through sand. "Sarah," he started, "I can explain." "Can you?" Her voice was so quiet it hurt. "Was any of it real, Jimmy? Or was I just another business deal?" Before he could answer, one of Blackwood's men stepped forward with a thick envelope. "Miss Miller, we have proof that your father's loan payments are 3 months overdue. The bank is prepared to foreclose unless I sell to you," Sarah finished. She squared her shoulders, and Jimmy saw that same quiet strength he'd fallen in love with. "Get off my property, Mr. Blackwood. All of you." "Sarah, please." Jimmy reached for her arm. She jerked away like his touch burned. "That includes you." The screen door slammed behind her with a finality that echoed in Jimmy's chest. Blackwood smiled, adjusting his cufflinks. "Tough break, kid. But hey, at least you tried. Unlike you, though, we play to win." After they left, Jimmy sat in his car for a long time, staring at the farmhouse. Finally, he pulled out his phone and dialed a number he'd sworn he'd never use. "Hello, Jimmy," his mother's sister, Aunt Eleanor, answered on the second ring. "I was wondering when you'd call." "I need your help, Aunt El, and I need you not to ask too many questions." 2 days later, Jimmy sat in the law office of Eleanor Preston Wright, watching her review the documents he'd found in the barn. His aunt had always been the black sheep of the Preston family, choosing environmental law over corporate profits, married to a jazz musician instead of a business tycoon. She was also the smartest person he knew. "This is interesting," she said finally, tapping the surveys. "Your father and this Blackwood character, they're not just after the land, are they? They want to privatize the entire water supply for the region." Jimmy nodded. Can you stop them?" "Better," Eleanor smiled, reminding him suddenly of his mother. "We can beat them at their own game. But I'll need access to all the orchard's financial records, and we'll have to move fast." "Small problem," Jimmy admitted. "The owner kind of hates me right now." "Then I suggest you fix that." His aunt stood, straightening her blazer. "You know, you remind me of your mother more each day. She would have been proud of you for choosing the right thing over the easy thing." Jimmy drove back to the orchard that evening, his aunt's words echoing in his mind. The sun was setting, painting the apple trees in shades of gold and pink, the same colors as that first evening, when everything had seemed so simple. He found Sarah in the barn, going through old papers by lamplight. She didn't look up when he entered. "I thought I told you to leave." "You did." He set a fresh cup of coffee from May's Diner, her favorite, on the desk. "I'm not very good at following orders. Ask anyone." "Is that supposed to be funny?" "No." Jimmy pulled up a crate, sitting across from her. "Sarah, I know I lied about why I came here. I know I betrayed your trust. But somewhere between the apple trees and arcade games, something changed. I changed. Why should I believe you? Because I walked away from my entire inheritance to protect this place, because I have a way to save the orchard, but I need you to trust me one more time." He pulled out Eleanor's business card. "And because I'm about to tell you everything, even though it might make you hate me more." Sarah finally looked at him, really looked at him, like she was trying to see into his soul. "I'm listening." For the next hour, Jimmy told her everything. His father's ultimatum, the discovered documents, the meeting with Blackwood, his aunt's plan. As he talked, the summer storm that had been threatening all day finally broke, rain drumming on the barn's metal roof. When he finished, Sarah was silent for a long time, just watching him through the rain-streaked windows. "You know what the worst part is," she said finally. "I was falling in love with you, the real you, the guy who works harder than he has to, who makes me laugh when everything's falling apart, who looks at this old orchard and sees magic instead of dollar signs." Jimmy's heart stopped. Was. A crack of thunder shook the barn. In the flickering lights, Jimmy saw tears in Sarah's eyes. "I don't know anymore, Jimmy. I don't know anything anymore." He stood slowly, pulling the metal box from his jacket. "Then let me prove it to you. These documents, the water rights, they're yours. Do whatever you want with them. Turn them over to the EPA. Use them to fight my father. Burn them. I don't care. I just want..." "Want what?" "A second chance. Not for my inheritance or my father's company. Just with you." The storm raged outside, but in the barn, time seemed suspended. Sarah stood, moving closer until he could see the gold flecks in her grey eyes. "Why?" she whispered. "Because I love you," Jimmy said simply. "The real you, the girl who works harder than anyone I've ever met, who still believes in magic even when everything's falling apart, who looks at this city boy and sees something worth saving." Sarah's hand trembled as she reached for the metal box. Their fingers brushed, and suddenly she was in his arms, her face buried in his chest, his heart thundering against her cheek. "I'm still mad at you," she mumbled into his shirt. "I know. And this doesn't fix everything. I know that too." She pulled back just enough to look up at him. "But if you ever lie to me again..." "I won't," Jimmy promised. "No more games, no more secrets. Just us, fighting for this place, together." The storm's fury began to fade, rain softening to a gentle patter on the roof. Through the barn's open door, they could see a rainbow forming over the orchard, arching over the apple trees like a promise. "Together," Sarah repeated softly, and this time when Jimmy leaned down to kiss her, she met him halfway. The war room, as Jimmy had started calling it, was set up in the farmhouse kitchen. Eleanor Preston Wright sat at the head of the table, surrounded by legal documents, financial records, and 3 empty coffee cups. Sarah paced by the window, while Jimmy leaned against the counter, watching his aunt work. "Well," Eleanor said finally, looking up from the papers, "the good news is we have them dead to rights on the water rights manipulation. The bad news, we have less than 48 hours before the bank forecloses." "What do we need?" Sarah asked, stopping her pacing. "A miracle," Eleanor smiled. "Or about $200,000. Jimmy ran a hand through his hair. "I've sold the Porsche and emptied my personal accounts, but it's nowhere near enough. There might be another way." Sarah disappeared into the living room, returning with a dusty photo album. Dad used to talk about the old harvest festivals they held here in the 60s. The whole town would come out, games, music, food stands. The orchard would make enough in one weekend to operate for months. Eleanor's eyes lit up. A community fundraiser. That could work. If we can show community support for the orchard, it strengthens our legal position against the water rights grab. In 2 days, Jimmy raised an eyebrow. "That's impossible." Sarah gave him that look, the one that made his heart skip. "Good thing you're dating a farmer, city boy. We specialize in impossible." The next 48 hours were a blur of activity. Sarah coordinated with local vendors and musicians, while Jimmy hit the streets, plastering the town with flyers. Eleanor worked her legal magic, filing injunctions and gathering supporters. The response was overwhelming. Stories started emerging. Couples who'd had their first date at Miller's orchard, families who'd been coming for generations, local businesses that depended on their apples. It seemed everyone had a reason to save this piece of local history. The evening before the festival, Jimmy found Sarah in the orchard, hanging fairy lights in the trees. The setting sun caught her hair, turning it to gold, and for a moment he forgot to breathe. "Penny for your thoughts?" she asked, noticing his stare. "Just thinking about the first time I saw you here." He stepped closer, helping her with a stubborn string of lights. "You looked at me like I was the most annoying thing you'd ever seen." "You were," but she smiled, leaning back against him. "Now you're just mostly annoying." "Progress." He wrapped his arms around her waist. "You know, whatever happens tomorrow." "Don't." Sarah turned in his embrace. "We're going to save this place. Together. Remember?" He kissed her then, soft and sweet, tasting of apple pie and hope. A throat cleared behind them. They turned to see Eleanor, holding her phone with a grim expression. "We have a problem," she said. "Your father's filed an emergency injunction. He's claiming the festival violates local zoning laws. If a judge signs off, we'll have to cancel." Jimmy felt Sarah stiffen in his arms, but before either of them could speak, the rumble of engines filled the air. They looked down the orchard's long drive to see a line of cars approaching, headlights cutting through the dusk. Leading the convoy was a cherry-red 1957 Chevrolet. At the wheel sat an elderly man Jimmy had never seen before, but from the way Sarah gasped, he knew exactly who it was. "Dad!" Sarah whispered. Robert Miller eased himself out of the car, leaning heavily on a cane. Behind him, more cars disgorged what seemed like half the town. Farmers, shop owners, families with children, teenagers in letter jackets. "Hope we're not too late to help," Mr. Miller said, his voice rough but strong. Nurse Jenkins said fresh air would do me good. Sarah flew down the drive into her father's arms. Jimmy hung back, watching the reunion through misty eyes, until Mr. Miller beckoned him over. "Hey, so you're the city boy who's been helping my daughter?" His handshake was firm despite his condition. "The nurses told me what you did, standing up to Preston and Blackwood. Not many would risk that much for a bunch of apple trees." "It's not just the trees, sir." Jimmy glanced at Sarah. "This place, it's special." "That it is." Mr. Miller looked around at the gathering crowd, and it looks like we're not the only ones who think so. May from the diner was setting up a food station. The high school band unpacked instruments. Children strung more lights through the trees. The orchard was coming alive with the kind of magic money couldn't buy. Eleanor's phone buzzed. She read the message and broke into a wide grin. "Judge Thompson just denied the injunction," she announced. "Toyhan, she's very interested in reviewing the water rights situation. First thing Monday morning." A cheer went up from the crowd. Sarah hugged her father again, then Jimmy, then Eleanor. "We're not out of the woods yet," Eleanor cautioned. "We still need to raise enough to stop the foreclosure. Then what are we waiting for?" Mr. Miller gestured to the assembling crowd. "Let's give them a harvest festival they'll never forget." The next few hours were a whirlwind of preparation. Jimmy found himself directing parking, setting up tables and taste-testing pies. Someone has to do it. As night fell, the orchard transformed. Fairy lights twinkled in the trees like stars brought down to earth. The smell of popcorn and apple cider filled the air. Music drifted through the evening. Not recorded hits from the mall, but real, live music played by real people who cared. Sarah moved through it all like a force of nature, her smile brighter than any light. She kept looking around in wonder, as if she couldn't quite believe what was happening. "Quite a girl," Mr. Miller said, appearing at Jimmy's elbow. They watched as Sarah organized a group of volunteers, her laugh carrying across the grounds. "Ah, yes, sir, she is." "You love her." It wasn't a question. Jimmy turned to face Sarah's father. "More than anything. Sir, I need to tell you something. When I first came here—" "I know why you came." Mr. Miller's eyes were kind but knowing. "What matters is why you stayed." Before Jimmy could respond, a black Mercedes pulled up to the entrance. William Preston stepped out, followed by Tom Blackwood and several men in suits. "Time to choose sides, son," Mr. Miller said quietly. Jimmy straightened his shoulders, already moving to intercept his father. Behind him, the festival continued. Music playing, children laughing, a community coming together to save something precious. He'd made his choice long ago. Between apple trees and trust funds, between corporate deals and fairy lights in the summer darkness, between the life he was born into and the life he wanted to live. The only question was whether it would be enough. The festival lights cast strange shadows across William Preston's face as he strode through the orchard's entrance, Tom Blackwood at his heels. Jimmy met them halfway, aware of the crowd gathering behind him. "This is quite the little show you've put on," William said, his voice carrying in the sudden quiet. The band had stopped playing. "But it doesn't change anything. The bank already has their money." Eleanor stepped forward, holding up a certified check. "The community raised enough to cover the back payments, with interest. Miller's Orchard stays exactly where it is." William's smile turned cold, charming, but ultimately futile. "Once the water rights transfer, that's not happening either." Sarah joined them, her father beside her. She held up the metal box. "We have the original surveys and documentation proving the aquifer is part of a protected watershed. The EPA is very interested in your plans to privatize it. You'd really throw everything away?" William turned to Jimmy. "Your inheritance, your future, your family name." Jimmy looked around at the orchard, at the lights twinkling in the trees, at the families gathered to save this place, at Sarah standing tall beside her father. He thought about the summer that had changed everything, about who he was and who he wanted to be. "No, Dad," he said quietly. "I'm not throwing anything away. I'm choosing something better. Listen to your son, William." Mr. Miller's voice was strong despite his cane. "Some things are worth more than money. I learned that the hard way." "This isn't over," Blackwood snarled, but William held up a hand. "Actually, Tom, I think it is." He studied Jimmy with new eyes. "My son seems to have outmaneuvered us quite thoroughly. Eleanor's injunctions, the EPA involvement, the community support. It would be a PR nightmare to continue. Will—" I said it's over. William straightened his tie. "Sometimes knowing when to walk away is the better part of valor. Isn't that what you always told me, Eleanor?" "Among other things," Jimmy's aunt smiled, "like how family is more than business deals and balance sheets." William nodded once, then turned to Jimmy. "You really want this life? Apple trees and small-town festivals?" Jimmy took Sarah's hand. "I want this life, these people, this place." Something flickered in William's eyes. Pride, regret. "Then I suggest you don't waste it." He turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, and son, your mother would have loved her." They watched the Mercedes disappear down the drive. The band slowly started playing again. Time after time, of all songs. Sarah squeezed Jimmy's hand. "You okay?" "Yeah, He smiled. For the first time in my life, I really am. The festival roared back to life around them. Mr. Miller was immediately surrounded by old friends. Eleanor began gathering signatures for a petition to protect the watershed. The smell of apple pie and victory filled the air. Jimmy pulled Sarah away from the crowds, leading her to their spot, the old tree where he'd first tasted one of her apples, where he'd first started falling in love with this place and this life. So, she said, looking up at him with those storm cloud eyes, what does a former trust fund baby do now? Well, Jimmy pretended to think, I hear there's this orchard that could use some help. The owner's kind of bossy, but she makes amazing pie. Bossy, Sarah poked him in the chest. I prefer decisively assertive. The point is, Jimmy caught her hand, suddenly serious. If she'll have me, I'd like to stay. Help run this place, make it everything it could be. Create something real, something that matters. Sarah studied him in the fairy lights. It's not an easy life. No fancy cars, no penthouse apartments, just hard work and apple trees and small-town festivals. And you, Jimmy touched her cheek, don't forget the most important part. Music drifted through the trees. Now it was Forever Young, the kind of song that defined moments like this. In the distance, they could hear laughter and celebration, the sounds of a community coming together to save something precious. I love you, Sarah Miller, Jimmy said softly. Not because of this place, but because you showed me what really matters. You gave me roots when all I had were wings. Sarah's eyes shimmered with tears. I love you too, city boy, even if you still can't tell a Macintosh from a Honeycrisp. Hey, I'm learning. He pulled her close. I've got time, we've got time. Their kiss tasted of apple pie and promises, of summer storms and new beginnings. Above them, the fairy lights twinkled like stars, and the old apple tree stood witness to another love story in its long history. Later, as they danced under those lights, surrounded by the community that had become their extended family, Jimmy thought about choices and chances, about trust funds and trust freely given. He thought about his father's parting words and his mother's memory, and the strange, wonderful path that had led him here. The orchard stretched out around them, its trees standing tall in the summer night. Tomorrow there would be work to do, apples to tend, a business to build, a future to create. But tonight was for celebration, for love, for the kind of magic that happened when you chose the right path instead of the easy one. Sarah laid her head on his shoulder as they swayed to the music. What are you thinking about? Jimmy smiled, holding her close. Just that some second chances are worth waiting for. The festival continued around them, but in that moment they were in their own world, a world of fairy lights and apple trees, of hard-won victories and well-kept promises, of a love that had grown from the most unlikely of beginnings into something as natural and enduring as the orchard itself. And in the end, that was all that mattered. Thank you for watching today's story. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to give it a big thumbs up, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel to relive the magic of the 80s every day with our heartfelt stories. May God bless you and your family, and don't forget to click on the video popping up on the screen right now. It's another totally rad story you won't want to miss. See you in the next video, and stay awesome.